Hello, you're watching Afghan News with Mohsen Jamal. A new Pentagon report provides the military's most positive assessment of the Afghanistan war in years, arguing the U.S. strategy to send a surge of troops to the country has achieved significant security progress and broadly arrested the momentum of the Taliban. The report comes as the military is trying to make its case to the White House to begin true withdrawals only slowly, keeping high numbers in Afghanistan in order to maintain pressure on Taliban fighters. The level of violence in Afghanistan remains high. The number of attacks from November 2010 to March 2011, the period of time covered by the new report, was significantly higher than a corresponding period a year before, although violence usually declines in the winter. The report makes the case for progress based on the U.S. operations to disrupt insurgents that have contributed to a loss of Taliban influence in key areas. The report argues that complex attacks are down, reflecting a decline in Taliban capabilities and eroding morale within the insurgency. Previous Pentagon reports have been more downbeat, assessing the security situations as deteriorating. The Taliban declared the start of a spring offensive on Saturday, warning they plan to target foreign troops in Afghanistan as well as Afghan security forces and government officials in a wave of attacks across the country. In a statement, the hardline Islamists warned Afghan civilians to stay away from public gatherings, military bases and convoys as well as Afghan government centers, as these would be the focus of the attacks. The Taliban statement comes a day after senior military officials and Western diplomats warned they expected a surge in militant attacks over the next week. Senior military officials said on Friday recent intelligence reporting indicated that the attacks planned by the Taliban, supported by the Al-Qaeda-linked Haqqani network and other insurgents, would include suicide bombings, while two senior coalition commanders said they anticipated the campaign of increased violence would last about a week. The Taliban statement said the targets of an operation it called Badr would be foreign forces, high-ranking officials of President Hamid Karzai's government, members of the cabinet and lawmakers, as well as the heads of foreign and local companies working for the NATO-led coalition. A gunman who opened fire at an Air Force training center in Kabul, leaving 8 U.S. troops and an American contract dead, did not appear to have any links to the Taliban, a NATO press release said Saturday. The Afghan ex-pilot involved was shot dead during the incident on Wednesday, which was triggered by a row and was the worst attack of its kind in almost a decade of war. The U.S. air trainer's death raised fresh questions over the massive NATO-led effort to expand and train Afghanistan's military and police so they can take control of security when foreign combat operations end in 2014. The attacker was a 45-year-old former pilot who had been working as an Air Force administrator. Colonel Muhammad Bahadur Rais Khail, the Afghan Air Force's media relations chief, said earlier. The Taliban claimed responsibility in a text message to media, but are known routinely to exaggerate their claims. An Afghan official speaking on condition of anonymity said the gunman was from a well-respected Kabul family and that the shooting was the result of a disagreement, not terrorism. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi has said that he will not leave Libya and that he is still prepared to enter a ceasefire, but only if all sides are involved. In a live address on the state television in the early hours of Saturday morning, Gaddafi said that he was still ready to enter a ceasefire, but that all sides must be involved and not only his own forces fighting against rebels in the east. The Libyan leader also called for negotiations with NATO powers to end the airstrikes on Libya, adding that if it was oil the coalition countries were after, there was no problem in negotiating contracts. If NATO powers were not interested in talks, however, the Libyan people would not surrender and were willing to die resisting what he called its terrorist attacks. He warned NATO that its forces would die if they invaded by land. Gaddafi said the NATO airstrikes and naval patrols went beyond the United Nations mandate and urged Russia, China and friendly African and Latin American countries to press the Security Council to take a fresh look at the resolution. Meanwhile, Abdul Hafiz Ghoga, the spokesman for the Transitional National Council based in Benghazi, said that the opposition forces are set to announce their first Minister of Defense as early as Saturday. The South Syrian flashpoint town of Daraa was hit by fresh shelling and heavy gunfire as Syrians prepared to bury scores of people killed in Friday's day of rage against the regime, a witness said. The army is firing at protesters in neighborhoods in the old town of Daraa, and at least 4 houses in the Karak neighborhood of the city have been damaged by shelling, which started at 3 GMT on Saturday. At least 62 people were killed in nationwide clashes on Friday when tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets. Activists said while authorities said 9 members of the security forces were killed by terrorist groups. Pro-democracy protests were held against President Bashar al-Assad's regime in most cities and major towns after Muslim weekly prayers as on past Fridays for a month. The Syrian Revolution 2011 on Saturday announced on its Facebook main page that funerals for the martyrs will be held at 13:30 GMT in all Syrian governors, and also gave a schedule of protests for the days ahead. The protesters pledged new countrywide demonstrations from Sunday at the start of what they called the week of breaking the siege. Ali Abdullah Saleh, the embattled Yemeni president, is reportedly preparing to sign a Gulf-led agreement on Saturday to phase him out of power in exchange for immunity from prosecution for him, his family, and top aides. However, many anti-government protesters have rejected the deal, which was endorsed by an opposition group. Pro-reform demonstrators are also planning to march to Presidential Palace in Sana'a on Saturday, demanding Saleh's immediate ouster. This comes as unrest spreads to the southern part of the country. At least 1 person was killed and many injured when security forces tried to break into a protest square in the coastal city of Aden. Tensions in Yemen have been boiling since gunmen shot dead 12 protesters in Sana'a on Wednesday, and the opposition warned that violence could derail the deal. Tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets across Yemen on Friday, vowing to stay there until Saleh quits his post, which he held since 1978. They also called for him to be put on trial for corruption in the deaths of the estimated 142 protesters killed since rallies began 3 months ago. At least 11 people were killed in a string of bombings and shootings in central Iraq a day after a suicide bomber killed 10 worshippers in a Shiite mosque. The violence on Friday underlined the security concerns Iraq still faces as American troops prepare to leave the country by the end of this year. In Baghdad, a bomb went off in a predominantly Shiite neighborhood, killing 3 police commandos and 1 civilian and wounding 24 policemen and 5 civilians, police and medical officials said. As police arrived on the scene to investigate, a second bomb exploded. Armed groups often use such staged blasts to lure insecurity and medical personnel who arrive on the scene to help and then fall victim to the subsequent blast. In the mixed Sunni Shiite province of Diyala, gunmen stormed the home of Bashir Motlaq, a Sunni imam, in Imam Wais village on Friday morning, killing the imam, his wife, and their 11-year-old daughter, police and medical officials said. In the town of Bohruz, a former Saddam Hussein stronghold, also in Diyala, 4 Sunni brothers aged between 20 and 35 are shot dead by gunmen wearing police uniforms, according to an army officer. And that people in southern United States are coping with the aftermath of the country's deadliest tornado disaster since the Great Depression. The death toll from Wednesday's storms reached 337 across 7 states, including 238 in Alabama, making it the deadliest U.S. tornado outbreak since March 1932, when another Alabama storm killed 332 people. Hundreds, if not thousands of people were injured on Wednesday, 990 in Tuscaloosa alone, and as many as a million Alabama homes and businesses remained without power. Barack Obama, the U.S. president who visited Tuscaloosa on Friday, said that he had never seen devastation like this and that the federal government is going to make sure they are not forgotten. The president's action makes federal funding available to affected individuals in storm-ravaged areas. Assistance can include grants for temporary housing and home repairs, low-cost loans to cover uninsured property losses, and other programs to help individuals and business owners recover from the effects of the disaster. And that's all for now. Thanks for joining us.